I realized that SBI की 200 साल पुरानी कहानी है जो लोगों को पता ही नहीं. People think that SBI was formed in 1955, so it's a 50-60-year-old bank. But then when I look back, the origin goes to 200 years. Actually, 1806 to be precise, so almost 216 years, which is not many companies in India can trace their lineage to 2 centuries. Remember, 1806, when I'm saying, is 50 years before the first war of independence, जो 1857 में हुआ.
Right, 1857.
तो उसके 50 साल पहले ये बैंक शुरू हुआ है as Bank of Bengal. So that is the beginning of SBI.
So, hello Vikrant sir, welcome back on the show. So, sir, firstly, हम ये episode start करें उसके पहले I have to say, now you have become the Awaara Musaafir Show's all-star, guest, because this is third episode we are recording, I think so. And there will be many more recordings iske baad bhi. This time we are talking about the SBI story. So, firstly, sir, welcome on the show. उसके बाद हम बात करते हैं.
My pleasure, Jayesh. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and I enjoy the conversation. So I look forward to that.
Awesome, sir. So like this is one of the most different episodes जो हम करने वाले हैं, because firstly banking, this is the first episode जो banking के ऊपर हम कर रहे हैं, and उसमें भी SBI का story. So firstly मुझे तो ये जान के हैरानी हुई कि this bank has started so many years back and इतना लंबा history है. So sir, why a book on SBI?
So, actually what happened was कि I saw an article in a newspaper which talked in glowing terms about a museum of SBI in Kolkata. I never knew कि SBI का कोई एक museum है, and that SBI has such fascinating history. So I actually went to Calcutta, and मैंने जब वो museum देखा, I was very amazed that the museum reminds you of a European museum. The way the lighting, the way it is displayed, the artifacts, it's absolutely beautifully kept, and it's I would say it's one of Calcutta's best known secret. I mean, least known secret. People don't know about it. Those people who are in Calcutta should actually visit the SBI museum. They'll be amazed at the kind of work you have from the ledgers, the initial bank accounts of stalwarts. And British tradition, one of the great things about British tradition was that they used to meticulously maintain all documents. So you have board meeting minutes right from 1800. They have maintained that. And I was helped, I should mention here, that Professor Amyo Kumar Bagchi of Calcutta and Avik Rai, who used to work in the history department, they have done phenomenal work over the last 30-40 years in terms of documenting SBI's history. So for me, it became very kind of easy that I had access to a lot of material, and SBI was kind enough to give me permission to say that you have access to the archives and all the material written by Professor Bagchi and Avik Rai. And that became, and I realized that SBI की 200 साल पुरानी कहानी है जो लोगों को पता ही नहीं. People think that SBI was formed in 1955, so it's a 50-60-year-old bank. But then when I look back, the origin goes to 200 years. Actually, 1806 to be precise, so almost 216 years, which is not many companies in India can trace their lineage to 2 centuries. Remember, 1806, when I'm saying, is 50 years before the first war of independence, 1857 में हुआ.
Right, 1857.
तो उसके 50 साल पहले ये बैंक शुरू हुआ है as Bank of Bengal. So that is the beginning of SBI.
Right. So Bank of Bengal as in the presidency banks जो उस टाइम पे आप जैसा कह रहे थे वो वाले banks?
Yes. So Bank of Bengal was during the East India Company time. So East India Company continued till 1857. 1857 की जो first war of independence हुई, तो उसके बाद India became formally a part of the British Empire. And then the British government took over. और उसके पहले वो East India Company चला रही थी. It was a company, but the company had its own armies. So they had broken up India into 3 presidencies: the Bombay Presidency, the Madras Presidency, and the Calcutta Presidency. These were the 3 presidencies. And there were a few banks here and there. There was one mention of a bank called Bank of Hindustan in 1770.
Oh, wow.
But But there was no real bank till the Bank of Bengal was formed in 1806. And they realized कि जब आपको इंडिया से पैसा ट्रांसफर करना है, so you need some sort of a formal agency through which you can do that. You can collect money, you can deposit money, and you can transfer money to, the East India Company was doing its own business. At the same time, a lot of officers of the East India Company were also engaged in their own businesses.
Right.
On their own, on the side, they're doing trading, they're partners in trading firms. बहुत पैसे कमा रहे हैं और सारा पैसा रिपेट्रिएट हो रहा है इंग्लैंड. And the Bank of Bengal was the first bank to be established in Calcutta as a presidency bank.
Got it.
Though it was not a government, it was not a East India Company owned bank, but it was supported a lot by East India Company. And hence the East India Company had a lot of say in it.
Okay.
And that's the way it started as what is called as the joint stock banking.
Okay.
So this was the first bank in Calcutta, because that time Calcutta was also sort of the default capital, right? Because the East India Company was headquartered there. Right. Even with British Empire, it continued for a long while. Yeah. Till in the early 20th century, they moved to Delhi. They shifted the capital to Delhi. Till then, Calcutta was the biggest. So that's the beginning of the story of the presidency banks.
So as I said, this is very shocking to know that this is a 200-year-old bank. And people, whenever this episode comes out and they get to know that it is a 200-year-old bank, they'll be shocked. क्योंकि किसी को पता ही नहीं था. And as you said, there's a museum for it in Kolkata. I think so. I have a lot of friends in Kolkata, and I have never heard from them that there is a museum regarding SBI. So that was something very new for me. So, can we dive into this part of the banking system where, as you said, कि उस time पे presidency banks and वहाँ से SBI की भी शुरुआत होती है. So, what kind of banking system उस time पे present था? What kind of borrowers were there? Who were some famous borrowers who took money from this bank?
So I'll go a little before that. कि India में there were a lot of money lenders, and if you look at let's go back not too much into the past, but let's say the Mughal period. So the Mughals emperors would mint their own coins, which would be considered as legal tender. कि आपने वो अशरफी दी या सोने की मुद्रा, gold coin, and those would be treated as legal tender, which would be then traded across the country. So you would have, but at the same time, there would be a lot of these intermediaries who would act as कि वो कॉइन का वैल्यू दाम क्या चल रहा है, बिकॉज गोल्ड के प्राइसेस चेंज हो रहे हैं. सो देयर विल बी दिस लॉट ऑफ इंटरमीडियरीज हु वुड एक्ट एज एक्सचेंज मर्चेंट्स, राइट, और एक्सचेंजिंग, एंड यू आर गोइंग फ्रॉम वन डोमेन, यू आर गोइंग फ्रॉम नॉर्थ टू साउथ, वहां पे कोई और टेंडर चल रहा है. सो दीज पीपल वुड एक्ट एज एक्सचेंजर्स. ड्यूरिंग औरंगजेब्स टाइम देयर वर पीपल लाइक जगत शेठ of who was in Bihar, who was such a big money lender that he was a big official in the Mughal court, and he was lending to the emperor. There was one Virji Vora in Surat, जिसने Surat had become a big port because the East India Company used to do a lot of trading to that, and he was a big money lender. He's lending to the Peshwas, he's lending to the Mughals. And there was a famous case where this Virji Vora refused to give a loan to Shah Jahan, saying that, I don't want to give a loan where there could be some default. So there was this big money, what people used to call them as merchant princes, which existed. But when the East India Company started becoming more and more powerful, and especially around the turn of the 19th century, the Peshwas had almost become neutral. I mean, they kind of, they were no more a power.
They phased out. Yeah.
They phased out. The Scindias had become part of the, they had accepted the sovereignty of the British, the Gaikwads. So there was no real power. So East India Company is now becoming more and more powerful. And by 1820, they were by far the most powerful force in the country. So the need for a banking arose because people realized that they needed some sort of a formal way by which they could transact. And which is where the Bank of Bengal came in and they started giving loans to a lot of people. But surprisingly, you find in SBI Museum in Kolkata, there is a 20-feet statue of Prince Dwarkanath Tagore.
Okay.
Rabindranath Tagore's grandfather.
Yeah.
Who was, great-grandfather, who was a one of the first borrowers of East India Company. And mind you, the Tagores were very, very good businessmen. They had ships, they had large plantations. With the Britishers, the Dwarkanath Tagore had joined to form a very famous company called the Car Tagore and Company, CARR, Car Tagore and Company. So they were doing fantastic business. And even today in the SBI Museum, you'll find books of accounts where you see mention of people like Dwarkanath Tagore who were borrowers from the bank, who had accounts at the bank. So a lot of famous people. Soon the Presidency Bank, Jayesh, and you'll realize that Calcutta was big, but the rise of the Parsis in Bombay was to happen very soon. And one of the reasons the Parsis rose was cotton trading. जो British, the American Civil War हुआ, तो उस समय the cotton supply in UK for Manchester and all those mills was in short, almost stopped. And which is where the Indian cotton traders really picked up, and the Parsis took that opportunity to start exporting cotton to England, and they made a lot of money. So the Bank of Bombay came up in 1940, and soon a few years later, the Bank of Madras also came up, because these are the three large presidency banks. But the difference between the three was very surprising. You will see that Calcutta was a mix of Indian traders and Britishers. Madras was very largely run by Britishers. While in Bombay, a large part of the business was being run by Parsis and Marwadis and Gujarati merchants. And Bank of Bombay became very, very powerful. And the three banks soon were competing with each other and were managing a large part of the business in India.
Okay. So, sir, you mentioned that this was like a 200 years old story. There was a bank called Bank of Hindustan. And then in the book also you have mentioned कि Vedic age में भी एक banking system था. And also I last time when we recorded the previous episode on Maratha Kingdom, so after that I read this book by Uday Kulkarni sir, which was about the Bakhar of Panipat, and even in that it is mentioned कि Sadashiv Rao Bhau went for that campaign. So on the way he was taking a lot of loans. He was given checks by the Peshwa. So can you talk a little more about कि उस time पे banking system exactly कैसा होता था? Because this is a very interesting aspect, because today in the modern age we see the banking system, we see कि modern तरीके से किस तरह से होता है, and all the scams we know about. But in the era gone before, it is a very I should say different thing. When I think about it कि उस time पे banking कैसा होता था, तो could you talk about that?
So again, Jayesh, one of the oldest businesses in the world is banking. And very surprisingly, banking does only three parts, which has not really changed much. You borrow money from people, you lend money to people, and you facilitate transaction. Basically, if you look at a bank, this is what it does. Now, the part of printing money has always been with the central power. So when you're in the Mughal time, or when you're some of the other kings in India, they used to print they were not printing money, they used to come out with coins. So you would have a copper coin, you'll have a silver coin, or you'll have a gold coin. तो उसके अलग अलग वहीं से वो आए हैं कि एक कौड़ी के दाम में, because cowrie shells were also at one point used as money to transact. So एक फूटी कौड़ी का भी दाम नहीं मिलेगा. That is the way we say. तो दमड़ी के बराबर. तो दमड़ी was also part of the copper coin. उसकी एक particular value थी compared to the gold coin. So just like RBI in India today prints notes, the Mughal treasury or the treasury of any king would respond. They would have mint. In the mint, they would mint their own coins. So Hareka emperor will put his name, or he'll put some image or some slogan on the coin, which would then be accepted as legal tender, and nobody else is allowed to mint. But you always needed people in between who would do the exchange trading, because the rates would keep changing. So there are two kinds of people who existed, which is the so-called banking system. One was the exchange traders, and the other would be pure money lenders. And when I mentioned people like Jagat Seth or Birji Vora or some of the people from whom the Peshwas took money, they were pure money lenders who were big because either they had money because they were holding large tracts of land from where they were collecting revenue, or they had other businesses through which they had generated a lot of cash. And they were then using that to lend it for, and if you look at the history of bank, again, it will be surprising that the Bank of England also came about because it wanted to finance war for the Britisher. So a lot of Rothschilds, if you look at globally, which is considered the oldest banking family in the world, it's a 500-600 years, again has made a lot of fortunes on wars. So wars have, very surprisingly helped a lot of businesses. One of them is banking.
Okay.
So even during the Peshwa's time, people are borrowing money, the kings are borrowing money, they are in default, they are not able to pay back. So a lot of these things were happening. The formal banking system had not evolved where here when you look at some of these banks, they are more like a private ownership. The concept of limited liability came about much later on, where you're issuing a share, the concept of a limited liability did not exist of a company till the Companies Act was formed. That did not exist. So it was a 100% liability. The bank, if some borrower defaults, the bank could go bust.
Right.
And that's the way it began till the East India Company and at that same point in time, other banks also globally were emerging. So India was not behind. It was at the same time in the early 19th century that other banks are also being formed. And then this continued for almost, till 1920, that the three presidency banks continued in their own form till the British Empire then decided to convert these private banks into a British Empire-owned Imperial Bank of India. And the Imperial Bank of India was performing the function of a bank and also kind of a reserve bank. And after which the Reserve Bank was formed later on. But
so the Imperial Bank of India is 1921, right?
1921.
Okay. And after that, what happens? How does the story continue?
So now the Imperial Bank of India is formed. They are the British-owned bank, the government-owned bank, and it's doing business. India becomes independent in 1947.
Yeah.
There is a lot of clamor now that we need. RBI is already there, so the division of work between RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, and Imperial Bank is clear. That Imperial Bank is a bank which is giving loans and collecting deposits, while the Reserve Bank of India would print currency, will be responsible for monetary policies and things like that. Now, obviously, after 1947, there's a lot of clamor that we need a state bank. Not like a State Bank of India, but a state bank, a state-owned, a government-owned bank, because the Imperial Bank is now a private bank. It's a private bank. We need a state-owned bank. And it took some while. So the SBI was formed in 55, which was almost 8 years after the independence.
Right.
Now, again, there were a lot of views on that. So J.R.D. Tata famously was against it because he had already suffered having lost Tata Airlines to the government. Tata Airlines ko le liya, Air India bana diya. J.R.D. was very upset. And his view was that why do you want to privatize a bank which is doing its own business, which is doing well? Why don't you create a bank? And I think the nationalization, the fervor of nationalization, the socialist approach of Nehru at that time was very strong. And eventually it was decided that the Imperial Bank of India would be nationalized and would be renamed as the State Bank of India. Right. Now, if you look at the number of bank branches then, were very, very few. It's a few hundred bank branches in India for a size of a country like India, which requires thousands and thousands of branches. Even today, Jayesh, it is very surprising that after 70 years, there is a lot of underbanked population in India.
Oh.
There are millions of people even today. It is after the recent, the Prime Minister's scheme that the many millions have got added to the banking system, but the formal banking system in India, even today, after so many banks, there are still millions of people who are not covered. So you can imagine it is today, it is still very bad.
Okay.
So there was a lot of need you can imagine in 75 years back, there was a lot of need that we need to have a bank which is willing to go out and create a banking network which is going to help agriculturists, small enterprises, traders, common man on the street, जिनको एक banking की सुविधा चाहिए. You will be surprised to know that in the Imperial Bank days, a current account खोलने के लिए 500 रुपए आपको बैंक में जमा करने पड़ते थे. मतलब उस समय 1920s में शायद लोगों की सैलरी महीने की 20, 25, 40 रुपए होगी.
राइट.
और उस समय आपको 500 रुपए जमा करने हैं आपको अगर करंट अकाउंट खोलना. It was very, so from the classes to the masses was the main thrust of the government that we need to provide banking becomes a backbone for a country to grow, for the economy to grow. And if I don't provide credit, if I don't provide a way by which people can save their money, how does the economy grow? So the State Bank was formed with a very clear purpose that we need to go out, and State Bank has played a phenomenal role in the development of the Indian economy itself.
Absolutely.
So वो socialist angle जो था उस समय, where oil companies came about, steel companies, coal mining companies, a lot of public sector organizations got created. SBI was one of the 1956, the LIC was formed. 256 private insurance companies were merged to form with the LIC Act. They formed the Life Insurance Corporation.
Right.
So even LIC was formed like that.
So, because now you have read the whole history of SBI, you have written a book on it. In the hindsight, according to you, it was a right decision, right? Because when we clearly look at the political picture today, so Nehru is someone who gets bashed a lot because of his decisions in the past. But according to you, in the hindsight, the study that you have done, it was a right decision.
I think as far as SBI, so, Nehru gets criticized for a lot of his other decisions. But I think when you look at the situation of India and its economy and the underbanked, 95% of the or more of the population underbanked, there's a very clear need that something like a state bank was a big need, and SBI was given a mandate to open so many branches, and the only way it could happen is by going out and giving a government-supported, government-owned bank. Right. Let me give you an example. Another example, Jayesh. It is very surprising that people talk about privatization of banks and private banks in India. And a few years back, around 20, 25 years back, the government had given a lot of licenses to people. There many banks had come up: Times Bank, Global Trust Bank, ING Bank, Vaishya Bank. But if you look at it today, you can count on. There are 4 banks: ICICI Bank, HDFC Bank, Axis Bank, and Kotak Bank, Kotak Mahindra, are the only 4 banks which come to your mind in private banking sector. Despite the fact that the government had allowed a lot of private banks, it is banking, while it looks very simplistic that I'm collecting money, I'm giving loans, I'm doing transactions. Very simple job. But people have not succeeded. So banking has not been something where we opened up to the private sector. You find that people have the other private companies, like if you look at the IT industry or many other businesses, the private sector has overtaken public sector and done phenomenally well. Right. But here you find that even today, SBI continues to be by far the largest. SBI has got 24,000 plus branches. I think HDFC or ICICI probably has 5,000 or 6,000 branches. So, there's such a big gap. And of course, there's a government mandate, so SBI would do a lot of things which private banks may not do. But it is not that what SBI is able to do, other banks, despite opening up and 100% private participation, other banks have done, many banks have done well. There are a few only, in fact, I mentioned 4 have done well. So even today, the scenario is not very different.
Right. So, firstly, there are 2-3 things which I want to ask you here. You mentioned that SBI has played a role in the growth of the Indian economy. It has been the backbone. So I want to dive into that conversation, and also I want to know from you that you also mentioned कि private banks को permission मिली है, but they could not do as much as SBI has done. So what is the reason behind that as well?
So to answer your first question, SBI was given a mandate. So agriculture lending, for example, was a big thrust for SBI. So that time organizations like NABARD got created, where SBI is to lend to these banks would further lend to the agriculture sector. They would directly go, and each branch manager was given a mandate as to how they should actually help the local artisans, local traders, small loans for MSME, manufacturing. So there was a very clear mandate in terms of helping the economy at a very, very, the grassroots level, while at the same time, SBI would obviously at that time be a big lender for many of the large businesses which are coming up in India. But the mandate was very clearly to grow the economy from the bottom. Like today we talk about CSR, corporate social responsibility has become a buzzword. Yeah. SBI was helping giving jobs or giving loans to people like ex-convicts. आज मैं जेल से अगर बाहर आता हूँ, तो nobody wants to touch me. Yeah. SBI would give loans to these people. They would give people to the downtrodden. They would give people loans to, cobblers, to scheduled caste, जिसे हम कहते हैं, which was the, not many people are willing to come forward and help these people. Yeah. SBI would go and help in corporate social responsibility. They would, for example, SBI would give paid leave to its employees कि वो सुनामी आया है या साइक्लोन आया है तो आप जाके मतलब इस तरह की चीजें SBI was doing as a part, not because of its profit making approach, but because it also wants to help the. So today CSR has become.
So it was basically like Bank of Aam Aadmi.
बिल्कुल. So जैसे आर.के. तलवार ने कहा, उनका जो चेयरमैन बड़े one of the best chairman SBI had, कि it is for the biggest bank for the smallest man.
Wow.
And that still continues, with SBI. And if you look at the way the SBI logo has been formed,
yeah.
तो उसके पीछे भी कहानी है कि वो NID के कामत में बनाया था वो लोगो. In fact, I want to clarify here because a lot of people I have seen on Google or some on various WhatsApp messages कि SBI का लोगो जो है वो कांकरिया लेक का अगर आप Google मैप करो,
हाँ,
एंड आप देखोगे कि कांकरिया लेक जो अहमदाबाद में है उसका बिल्कुल very similar, and there are some stories कि it was inspired by that, but I don't think that is really true because the SBI archives don't mention that. But the logo, there are various interpretations. जैसे a lot of people think it's a keyhole. It is a key to my success, key to my wealth.
Yeah.
Then there is a logo कि the common man is in the center and the SBI branches are around it to help him. So it represents solidity, it represents stability, it represents reach, and which is what SBI, I mean, those are the ethos by which SBI is going forward.
And its old logo was a banyan tree.
Banyan tree, because वो RBI का था पहले, Imperial Bank का भी था कि banyan tree talks about Indian tradition, its roots, and solidity. But SBI then wanted to show it as a while modern, but at the same time very solid in its representation.
Yeah. So, sir, like when this whole dawn of the new era comes for SBI, which is key from like presidency, it goes to Imperial. From Imperial, it becomes then SBI. So when it becomes SBI finally, what are the key changes we see? What are the key decisions this bank has to take now? So can you talk about that?
See, one of the good things the Imperial Bank had done was creating of what is called as the probationary officer system. And even today, Jayesh, you would have seen कि आज भी लाखों graduate जो है, वो SBI का जो PO का exam होता है, उसके लिए वो तैयारी करते हैं, coaching classes. So the State Bank of India probationary officer system was created by Imperial Bank. Of course, that time they were taking only Britishers. Yeah. And there was a lot of JRD again was very much against the fact that Indians are not being taken into the bank as much as they should be. But the SBI probationary officer system became a backbone for the bank to create a very strong management expertise right from, as a management trainee, the person joins and then becomes. Most chairmen of SBI have joined as probationary officers for the bank.
Yeah.
And risen to the level of chairman and retired. So they then started for the initial first few years, they were a couple of people were taken directly from either from the RBI or from the government. But R.K. Talwar, for example, had joined Imperial Bank as a professional officer, and he's one of the youngest chairman at the age of 45. He was made the chairman of the State Bank. So State Bank has always been led by people who understood the bank extremely well. Even today, the SBI officers are rated very well by, when I talk to many of my friends in the banking industry, the training they offer, the kind of, so SBI created a lot of training colleges. They created agriculture related training colleges. They had a training college in Hyderabad, which was the SBI Academy for Professional Officers. So a lot of focus was given on training these managers to understand what their job is, not just the banking, but what is the larger purpose for which SBI has been formed. And I think that has played an important role in growing. SBI was the first company to create, today many of my friends who are in the investment banking area, Jayesh, many of them started their careers with SBI Capital Markets, which is called SBI Caps. And SBI Caps led the IPOs, investment banking, consulting for a lot of companies for a very long period. So SBI Caps has created a lot of managers today who are leading large investment banking and other organizations in India. The SBI Capital Markets again was formed in the early 70s because they wanted to create a mechanism by which people can access capital markets. Similarly, today, if you see SBI, whether it's life insurance, credit cards, general insurance, or mutual fund, at least these 4 or 5 categories in banking, SBI Cards is a listed company now, but all others are part of the SBI itself, State Bank of India. And they all continue to be either number 1 or number 2 in their respective fields, which is really admirable for a size of and complexity of SBI. They continue to life insurance or credit card, they all continue to be number 1 or number 2 in their respective categories.
Got it. So, sir, like you mentioned some names here, people who have held a place in SBI at a very potential role, at a very important role. So, are there like people who have made SBI today what it is?
Oh, I think there are many chairmen, and probably I would not be able to name all of them. But let's look at the first chairman who became very popular, Ramesh Kumar Talwar. You know, R.K. Talwar was so popular and he got his second term, but then he had to resign. So there's a very interesting story behind that. In fact, D.N. Ghosh, N. Wagul, who was heading ICICI, talks about it in his memoirs because he was an SBI officer when Talwar was forced to resign. तो संजय गांधी का एक दोस्त था जो एक सीमेंट कंपनी का ओनर था, and he wanted loan from SBI, and Talwar refused, saying that it does not meet the criteria. So the government was pressurizing SBI, saying that you have to give the loan. So Talwar said, no, I'm sorry, we cannot give the loan. So the finance minister was asked to terminate Talwar.
Oh.
क्या आप उसको निकाल दो.
Okay.
So the finance minister went back to the government and said, sir, ये possible नहीं है because SBI has been formed by an SBI Act. So the finance minister does not have the powers to remove the chairman of SBI. Now, because Sanjay Gandhi is so upset and he wants to ensure that the loan is cleared, he went to the parliament and actually got the act amended.
Wow.
And then the finance minister again went back, but again he doesn't have the courage to tell Talwar that I'm going to terminate you. So he's requesting Talwar ki sir aap resign kar lo ya leave pe chale jao. That is the kind of charisma such people carried. I have also written about somebody like O.P. Bhatt, who again transformed SBI when he came in the 80s. How to make SBI today, you see a lot of memes about SBI कि वो विजय मल्ल्या गया बैंक में तो उसको कहा लंच के बाद आओ तो इसके लिए लोन नहीं मिला and things like that. Some of that could be partially true. I mean, after all, it's a very, very large bank, so I'm sure there are some quote unquote sarkari people. But O.P. Bhatt really transformed the bank when he realized that our people need to really become customer friendly. And he did a series of interventions to ensure that the bank really was customer oriented. Arundhati Bhattacharya, again, a very name because first lady chairperson of a bank. Again, she joined as a professional officer. and she's risen to the level of a chairperson.
Yeah.
So there are many. I mean, most of the chairmen have come from the ranks, and because of which they carried not only the legacy but made significant changes to the way the bank. I was lucky to meet and talk to D.N. Ghosh,
Yeah.
who was also involved in the bank nationalization. He was the joint secretary in Ministry of Finance when Indira Gandhi in
Wow.
1969 nationalized 14 banks.
Hmm.
All this Canara Bank, Punjab National Bank, Vijaya Bank, many of the Bank of Baroda, you see, they were all private banks.
Yeah.
And they were nationalized in 1969 and 14 public sector banks were created.
Right.
So D.N. Ghosh was also chairman of SBI. One of his main contribution was computerization of SBI. और
Okay.
उस समय जब कंप्यूटराइजेशन हुआ तो देयर वाज अ लॉट ऑफ रिलक्टेंस. यू कैन इमेजिन कि वो लोगों को लग रहा है कि मेरा जॉब चला जाएगा. नाउ बैंक में नोबडी इज रिक्वायर्ड, एवरीथिंग इज डन बाय कंप्यूटर्स. एंड ही वाज ट्राइंग टू एक्सप्लेन टू द employees that your job won't go. I think computerization will only help your job to become better. And today you see, I mean, everywhere nobody talks about it. Today it's on app and everything.
Yeah.
But those were some of the very so important changes led by people who were at the top, at the chairman's level.
Right.
Like OP Bhatt ने बड़ा interesting काम किया कि पहले award ceremony होता था. So award ceremony में people are, you go to some hotel or some large conference room and people are given awards. So OP Bhatt changed that and said, the chairman's bungalow on Malabar Hill is a fascinating piece of history. It's called Dunedin. And it's a very beautiful bungalow with lovely gardens and fountains. And, it's a very beautiful place. I've seen only photographs. I've not got the chance to visit that place yet. But what the chairman did was that he held this award ceremony in the chairman's bungalow.
Okay.
It was also an aspirational thing for people to say, ki, I have joined this bank. Mr. Bhatt joined as a professional officer. He's now staying in this bungalow. Maybe 25, 30 years from now, I can also be in this bungalow as a chairman and a resident.
Right.
Such things they did, which is very aspirational for people. And but more importantly, focusing on customer orientation and customer focus. I think it still continues to be a work in progress, but my sense is that they made a lot of progress in that.
Yeah. So, sir, when you mentioned ki computerization karna pada and he had to explain to people that your job won't go, I am very sure ki the younger audience who is watching this or listening to this, they would be shocked because for me also, like I'm late 90s kid, and for me as well, this whole we never got to see ki computerization exactly kaise hua tha and what was the people's reaction at that time. So this is very fascinating.
If you have to visit a bank branch, and when I was in school and college in the 70s and 80s, if you go to a bank branch, after उनके 3 बजे वो business hours खत्म हो जाएंगे या तो उसके बाद 3-4 घंटे all the managers would sit because they have to update the ledgers, they have to update all the data of all the entries, and they would be sitting till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the night. There's a lot of manual work. A bank manager was doing, even if he's working for a public sector, and you can ask some of your friends जिनके parents public sector bank में काम करते थे, it was not a 9 to 5 job. It was a 9 to 8 job. All these bank managers would sit till late, including the clerks. They'll sit till late in the evening and manually सारा ledger update हो रहा है, totaling हो रहा है, cash जमा हो रहा है. There's a lot of work they have to do at the back end. And all that with computerization, it helped to make that, that is the time all these things like the RTGS and all those things got introduced. Pehle, a check used to take, you're sending a check, clearing ke liye jayega, and then it will take so many days. A lot of those things got then streamlined to make it much easier. So bank managers, in the 70s and 80s have worked very hard.
Right.
They have a lot of manual work they should do.
Yeah, I can totally relate with it now because when you said कि it was 9 to 8 job, काफी मतलब hard work वाला काम था because now we have computers. It doesn't seem that tough, but yeah, it was.
Yes.
And also, sir, like for people like me who are late 90s kid, हमें तो scam 1992 के बारे में भी अब अच्छे से पता चल रहा है. But my parents knew about this. So when that series came out, I used to keep asking them कि सच में इतना बड़ा कुछ हुआ था? What was the reaction of people? So and also you have also mentioned this scam wala part in the book. So I would like you to go into that conversation as well, because the younger audience, they would love to listen to this.
Yes, in fact, the serial is wonderfully made and it gives a lot of details. But let me tell a little bit about it. Ki Harshad Mehta, and this we're talking more about the capital market, because the capital markets were not really very strong at that point in time. A lot of paper transactions used to happen. You used to buy shares, so आपको एक form fill up करना है, then you have to give it to the broker. The broker will put its stamp.
Yeah.
The share certificates would come in physical form. फिर वहाँ signature match नहीं हो रहा है. So Harshad Mehta found a lot of loopholes in the system where he realized that people, of course, he was a very, very sharp investor. So he was investing based on, to say कि मैं fundamentals देखता हूँ, I look at the company's, inherent strengths, and then I'm buying. But then he started manipulating the markets, and it was easy for these traders to do that because a lot of those transactions are happening. All the transactions are happening on the Bombay Stock Exchange floor.
Yeah.
And the Bombay Stock Exchange floor is a mad place where, you have all these signals, kharido, itna becho, all those hand signals and all that. It's very complex and a very, very fast moving and a high pressure floor. And this guy found a way, and what he essentially did was he was able to get a lot of money from banks without really giving any collateral behind it. And the banks are assuming that the paper I've got is enough to cover that. And he's rotating a lot of money within the banks and using that money to buy stocks, sell stocks, and make profits out of it. When somebody really tried to stop that, it is where the whole thing collapsed. SBI, in fact, played a kind of an important role. And Sucheta Dalal ki jo kitab hai, jiske basis pe ye serial bhi bana hai, she talks in great detail about that. SBI literally managed to save itself by getting it money back from Grindlays Bank. But that's where Sucheta Dalal realized that there is something going on. And then when she started investigating, this whole thing came out. So, and very unfortunately, if you look at it, and I'm talking again about capital market scams, not really about the banking, but just a few years after Harshad Mehta scam, you had the Ketan Parekh scam.
Yeah.
And again, Ketan Parekh was a protege of Harshad Mehta, who had learned a lot of tricks from him. And he again did this, what is called as a pump and dump scheme. कि आप एक share price को तेजी से आगे बढ़ाओ. You spread the news in the market that, it's going up. So many people buying from 100 rupees, it goes to 200, 300, 500 rupees. And then this guy exits by selling off, and suddenly the whole thing falls and people are left holding shares at a very high price. Till SEBI really came about, before that we had control of capital markets.
Yeah.
Control of, then SEBI came in. So a lot of these scams have taken place because the capital markets in India was not as strong. The banking system was still quite robust. Yeah. But we did not find the capital markets supporting that. There was one very interesting episode which some people have asked me. It's called the Nagarwala episode. It took place during Talwar's time. Okay. Bada interesting kahani hai, and this was during Talwar's time in the 60s. A phone call came to a Delhi branch कि मैं Prime Minister के office से बोल रहा हूँ. And this was during the 71 Bangladesh war.
Okay.
And then he said, I'm transferring the call to the Prime Minister. And this person mimicked Indira Gandhi's voice.
Wow.
And कहा कि हमारा आदमी आएगा, उसको 60 लाख रुपए देने. And then this person told the man कि you have to go to a particular place and there is a code word, आप किस देश के हो? And he'll say मैं हिंदुस्तान, आप कहोगे मैं हिंदुस्तान का हूं, and he'll say मैं बांग्लादेश का हूं. And this is the code word, and 60 lakhs was given to this person.
Okay, this has happened.
This happened.
Okay.
Now, luckily, by then this phone call is happening and they realize that we have been looted off 60 lakhs. It's a very big amount.
Yeah.
Luckily, this person had the common sense and he had noted the car number, the taxi number,
Right.
in which this person had come. And फटाफट वो police wale, they got into action, and eventually this Nagarwala, who was the person who had collected the money, was caught. And there was a sub-inspector who was also following this case, and he was the main person who did all that. Now, unfortunately, what happened, within a year, so SBI recovered the money except for some 4,000 rupees, which was given to some person for the transaction.
Yeah.
वो पूरे 60 lakh वापस आ गए. So SBI recovered its money. There was no loss of cash.
Yeah.
The question was, what was this entire, Prime Minister के office से phone आ रहा है? What is it about? Now, unfortunately, within 1 year, Nagarwala and that sub-inspector both died.
Okay.
The main characters in this soap opera are dead. Now, I was a few months back where 2 committees were formed later on to find what exactly happened. और आज तक वो मिस्ट्री रिजॉल्व नहीं हुई कि ये क्या सीन था, किसने 60 लाख रुपए मंगाए थे, किसके लिए मंगाए थे, was it a political, was it the opposition party playing some role, was it really the Prime Minister who wanted to give it to somebody for Bangladesh war, what was it? It was never found.
And so both the people who died, like, was it a natural death or like all of a sudden?
One died in mysterious circumstance, one died of heart attack. So वहां पे भी question mark है कि actually क्या हुआ. And अभी 3-4 साल पहले, one of the persons who was associated with the case, he also died.
Okay.
So that episode had never come out. And somebody asked me, why have you not mentioned about it? Because I could not find any logical conclusion of what happened. But it was a very, very famous sort of a scam, you can say. But luckily, SBI did not lose any money. So they got the money back. But it was a lot of questions raised about during Talwar's time as to what had happened. And SBI then took a lot of effort, checks and balances to ensure that such a thing should not get repeated again.
Right. So this was something Joe, I don't think so a lot of people even know about this incident.
That's right.
Wow.
Because 1971 की बात है, it's like, a few generations before you. Yeah. So हम भी उस समय छोटे थे, but when I was researching for this book, I saw तलवार का बहुत लंबा एक उन्होंने अपने words में इसके बारे में describe किया. Then I did a lot of research, but I could not really get any conclusive evidence to write further कि क्या हुआ. So I left it at that, saying, this the episode took place, but nothing came out of it.
Yeah. So, like towards the end of this podcast, I want to discuss something very important now about SBI, because so when we look at the history of SBI, it starts from its very basic roots. It goes on to become a very important part of the nation. It becomes backbone of the nation. And then such scams happen, such incidents happen that tarnish its image. How does SBI come back? Like, because अभी भी memes वगैरह तो बन ही रहे हैं उनके ऊपर.
See, this is a question a lot of people ask me कि आपने किताब में जो है SBI के NPS के बारे में या इनके बारे में आपने नहीं लिखा है. So I should have put that disclaimer upfront कि my idea of the book was really to write a story of the history of the bank. I was not
right.
I'm not a economist to sort of critique, not criticize, but critique, do a critical analysis of the working of SBI.
Yeah.
2 reasons. One, because I'm not an economist or I'm not critiquing it. And number 2, a lot of ex-chairmen of SBI themselves have in their memoirs written in great detail about some of the scams or some of the NPAs. And yesterday somebody was asking, SBI ka itna loan hai? Now what happens is, if you look at the bank of a size of SBI, it would be either leading the consortium or be a part of the consortium of lenders whenever it comes to a very large project of 40,000 crores, 50,000 crores or something like that. SBI would necessarily be one of the members, either leading it or being a part of it. So it is quite natural that any large project, by default, SBI in most cases would have been a lender, and there would be definitely repercussions that there would be some NPAs related to that. But while I'm not getting into the analysis, but if you look at a cursory, agar बहुत सारे newspaper articles देखो तो people like banks like Punjab National Bank and some of the other public sector banks have been pulled up. Their executives have been, under investigation. You don't find that happening with SBI.
Yeah.
So there seems to be some balance there. But frankly, Jayesh, I did not get into much details of it because when you read the book, you will find that there are such amazing anecdotes from the president.
Yeah.
I didn't talk about how the Presidency Bank that time used to treat its customers, right? I mean, they were so arrogant, they were so snooty, they were not bothered about a common man. जैसे मैंने बताया कि करंट अकाउंट खोलने के लिए 500 रुपए चाहिए,
500 रुपए खैर
उस समय 1000 रुपए का नोट था. 1870s में 1770 में भी 1000 रुपए का नोट था. यू कैन इमेजिन कि अगर 1000 रुपए का नोट है तो कॉमन मैन तो कहीं से भी मीलों दूर उसके पास नहीं आ रहा है, क्योंकि वो तो उसकी तो पूरी 8-10 साल का इनकम भी उसका 1000 रुपए नहीं है. So the banks were, so there are very interesting articles about how, the presidency banks where there are HR policies. There are very interesting stories about how our poor employees were treated so badly. किसी ने बताया कलकत्ता में कि सर यहाँ पे हम कैंडल लगा के हम रात को काम कर रहे हैं, बिजली नहीं है, इट्स वेरी रिस्की. So the manager is answering the question saying तो क्या फर्क पड़ता है, मतलब सब जगह ऐसे ही काम होता है. Things like that. So there are a lot of such stories I have given about the way, and a lot of businesses, how there's a very interesting angle about the entire Swadeshi movement. कि early 20th century में the whole Swadeshi movement came about, which is where this Punjab National Bank, Canara Bank, and so many other banks emerged as a competition to the presidency banks. So I was really covering 2 centuries of banking. So the critical analysis of SBI as a bank was not really the, my thought, because I thought that there's so much to cover, so much of material about the fascinating history. Critique के लिए और critical analysis के लिए बहुत सारे economists हैं, business journalists हैं जो बहुत सारी चीजें लिखते हैं. But this book is meant for, any student of economics, banking or management to just know how banking evolved in India over 2 centuries. So that's what I'm really trying to cover.
Right. Because, sir, this is a good point that you raised, because when we look at the history of SBI, it is not just SBI's history. This is the whole history of banking system in India. And that is so fascinating. In fact,
it says 2 centuries of banking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, so, yes. Yeah, you got that. Yeah.
So, I would really request people to buy this book and go through it. And it is a very easy read, because I think so I finished it in 3 or 4 days. And the whole history is so beautiful, because कहाँ से चालू होता है, कहाँ पहुंचता है. इनफैक्ट पहली बात यही पता चलना कि it is a 2 century old bank, वही सबसे बड़ी बात है. तो sir, this was a good book, really good book. And any ending notes on whatever you want to share about SBI?
एक मैंने किताब में भी लिखा था, तो पहली बार SBI ने राष्ट्रपति भवन के कॉम्प्लेक्स में ब्रांच खोली है, एंड द करंट रामनाथ कोविंद प्रेसिडेंट जो हैं, उन्होंने भी अपना अकाउंट SBI में खोला. एंड इट गोज बैक टू से दैट SBI इज फ्रॉम द फर्स्ट सिटीजन टू अ कॉमन मैन. SBI इज फॉर एवरीवन. एंड द करंट चेयरमैन आंसर्ड इट nicely when he said the elephant is ready to dance. So I think it's a very, very solid story. But more importantly, what I really enjoyed, Jayesh, was discovering the history of how banking in India evolved, and how from the Parsi businessman to the Calcutta businessman to the Swadeshi movement to private banks to Lala Lajpat Rai forming Punjab National Bank, so many such beautiful events which created the whole banking system in India. So it is more about that than while it is called the SBI story, actually it's the banking story of India.
Exactly. So, sir, before we end this episode, I would just show the book for everyone. So this is the book, and in fact, this is a hardcover, very beautifully designed book as well. I would request everyone to go out there, buy this book. You can find it on Amazon, Flipkart, or your nearest bookstores. So many, in fact, there's Kitab Khana in Mumbai. So I went there, and this book was there as well. So I was talking to the person over there, and I told him, please buy this book. So thank you so much, sir, for doing this episode and bringing the story of SBI in front of everyone. This was such a fascinating part of our history जो शायद किसी को पता नहीं है. तो kudos to you, sir, for that, and thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. My pleasure, Jayesh. Thank you very much.